Now picture yourself standing on the walls of your city. Surrender is not an option. You know what's coming. Looking out at the horizon, a dark cloud of dust rises in the distance. The earth trembles beneath your feet. Tens of thousands of Assyrian warriors marching toward you, their iron weapons gleaming in the sunlight. The Assyrians were not just conquerors. They were the nightmare of the ancient world. But how did they rise to power? What made them so terrifyingly effective? And did their own brutality lead to their downfall? Stay with me, because the truth is far more shocking than you think. Before we began the story, subscribe, like, and drop your comments. Let's begin. The Assyrians weren't always the unstoppable force that history remembers. They started as a small kingdom along the Tigris River in what is now Iraq. But something changed around 900 BCE. A new kind of leader emerged, one who saw war not just as a means of defense, but as the very foundation of the empire. Their kings from Tiglath-Pileser III turned war into a science. They built the world's first professional army, an organized, state-funded war machine unlike anything before it. Soldiers were trained, equipped, and ready to fight year-round. The Assyrian war machine was unlike anything the ancient world had seen. They mastered the use of iron weapons when most still relied on bronze. They perfected siege warfare, using battering rams, sappers, and even psychological tactics to break their enemies before battle even began. Their cavalry units were unmatched, giving them speed and mobility that no other empire possessed. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they crushed them with psychological warfare. They made an example out of those who resisted, ensuring the next city would surrender before a battle even began. If there is one thing the Assyrians are remembered for, it is their cruelty. They weren't just conquerors, they were masters of fear. Their inscriptions, carved into stone, proudly detail the horrors they inflicted on those who defied them. Victims were flayed alive. Heads were stacked into pyramids at city gates. Entire populations were forcibly relocated to prevent rebellion. And the worst part? The Assyrians wanted the world to know. They wanted their enemies to be so terrified that they would submit without a fight. But here's what you may not know. This brutality was calculated. It wasn't random violence, it was a strategy, a way to control vast territories with minimal resistance. And for a time, it worked. At its peak, the Assyrian Empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to Egypt. Their cities, like Nineveh, were grand metropolises filled with palaces, libraries, and temples. They weren't just warriors, they were builders. They created the first known library, collected under King Ashurbanipal, an advanced road system for rapid military movement, complex administrative systems that influenced later empires. But even the greatest empires have their limits. And for the Assyrians, their own strength became their greatest weakness. For centuries, they ruled through fear. But the problem with ruling by terror, the moment you show weakness, your enemies strike back. By the late 7th century BCE, the empire was stretched too thin. Civil wars weakened them. Their brutal policies had created too many enemies. And when the Babylonians and Medes formed an alliance, it was over. Nineveh, the jewel of the empire, was burned to the ground in 612 BCE. The once mighty Assyrians disappeared from history almost overnight, and yet their influence remained. Their military tactics were studied by later empires. Their administrative structures inspired future governments. Even their reputation for terror lived on. The Assyrians were history's first superpower. They weren't just warriors, they were innovators, architects of an empire that shaped the world. But they also proved a crucial lesson. When fear is your only tool, it will one day turn against you. So, what do you think? Were the Assyrians the ultimate conquerors, or were they doomed by their own brutality? Drop your answer in the comments.